So it's officially 2:30. Shall we begin? Marie, would you like to take the floor and do the introductions?
Okay, thank you very much, David. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody here to our webinar. For some of you, it's this afternoon. For some of you, it's very early morning. And thank you for attending. And for some of you, it may be evening time. But it's our editorial chat with the Irish Journal of Technology Enhanced Learning. And I'm looking forward to this really, really interesting discussion with colleagues from the editorial board, Leigh Graves-Wolf here from University College Dublin, my colleague, Orna Farrell from Dublin City University, Tom Farrell from Munster Technological University, and Fiona Concannon for the University of Galway. And they're joined by a number of special issue authors, Hazel Farrell from South East Technological University in Waterford, Sarah Gretter and colleagues from Michigan State University in USA, Clive Holton, Bayes Business School, City, London, University of London, Abby Maguire, Central Michigan University, and Sasha Taklan, University of Helsinki in Finland. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Leigh and to thank you all most sincerely for presenting your work and your ideas and your insights about this really important topic and for joining us in the Centre for the Study of Higher Education. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. And to get started, I just have a few quick notes on the special issue. I was lucky to be the lead editor of the special issue with my wonderful colleagues who you'll hear a little bit from as well. But we'd like to leave the bulk of the time for our amazing authors to hear about each of their experiences with authoring with AI, and then we'll leave time for questions as well. So I thought I'd start out with just a little bit about the journal. If you haven't heard of it before, it's the Irish Journal of Technology Enhanced Learning, and we're supported by ILTA, the Irish Learning Technology Association. And the journal is celebrating its 10th year this year in operation. And it's a diamond open access journal, which means it is free to submit and publish, and all articles are available free and open access as well. And in creating this special issue, we were thinking about doing something around AI, as it's something we all need to tackle and discuss at the moment. And I think it was Tom who said, kind of jokingly at first, why don't we just have AI write all of the articles? And in talking a little bit more, we said there might be something to that. And so we were trying to answer, what does AI really know about technology enhanced learning? What happens when you go all in with AI and ask it to write? And what does engaging this process say not only about our discipline, but our humanity and identity as scholars? So we, from a pragmatic standpoint, the call was very, very structured. We asked people to write an introduction, about a 500-word introduction, talking about how they came up with the idea, and then to present the paper, report, or book review that was written by AI, and then to critically reflect on the process. And from an authorship perspective, we were being very careful in saying that, that the transparency around AI and trying to work through what a responsible use of AI was through this this process. And we'll talk more about that as we get through the presentations and from what you hear from the authors as well. So before I turn things over to Tom, and I see Orna has joined us as well, one of the really important things to us in this special issue was the turnaround time. With everything changing so quickly related to AI, we knew that we had to do something, and something fast. So the special issue call was announced September 18th. Our reviewers were incredible, and authors were incredible also in producing things in a really timely manner. And when revisions were requested, those were turned around within a very brief 2-week period. And the issue was 81 days later, which actually was 80 days. we published, actually hit go on the issue the night before the official launch, just to make sure we had any kinks worked out, and made the deadline. Now we'll deconstruct what that all means in a little bit as well, but that's just kind of the high-level overview of the issue. We had submissions from all over, which was wonderful to see. And in summary, we ultimately published perspectives from 8 different countries that had a range of familiarity and expertise with Gen AI from the author standpoint. And there were 5 position papers, 13 short reports, and 2 book reviews. And we've got a nice range of those represented today. So that's sort of just the big high-level overview. And I think I'll turn things over to Tom or Orna for a minute if you want to hop in with a couple other perspectives from the editorial standpoint, and then we'll move on to our authors.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly, and I agree with you, Leigh. We're mindful to give the authors their say. Yeah, I suppose we had an editorial meeting, and I was half joking, whole in earnest when I suggested I didn't know what the actual format would look like in the end, and I would like to sort of say to people that it did take a while to kind of refine what the call would be and what it would look like there, because we wanted it to have value and to have work. But I think, as I said, like everybody's heard me talk about this subject matter. I think there's a bit of sort of, it's a bit like that thing in The Simpsons where, you know, the woman at the town hall is sort of meeting and saying, well, somebody think of the children. And I think some of the reactions around the use of generative AI has been over the top. As I said, either, you know, almost messianic zeal about it, or else, you know, sort of fearing that the end of the world is nigh as we know it. And I suppose what this special issue does, these people they're all working in further or higher education. They're sticking their name to the paper. It is a scholarly output, but it's also our way to say to students, look, this is what they've done, you know, and they can do certain things and certain things they can't do so well. So we really want this to be, I suppose, an exemplar and a sort of teaching and learning resource going forward. I'll hand over to Orna.
Oh, your mic, we can't hear you, Orna.
Oh, sorry. How's that?
That's better.
Okay, sorry, I've got many screens and webcams. I have to select the right one. Hi everyone. I'll be brief as well. Delighted to be here today to the kind of 3rd webinar we've done in the last few weeks disseminating the special issue. Thanks to colleagues in UCD for inviting us. I suppose for me, things I learned during the special issue, well, I suppose how to use Gen AI in research is one big one, and how limited some of the tools actually are when you really put them under pressure and try to use them in a way that humans do research. So that was very interesting. I really liked the creativity and the differences and disciplinary aspects of the papers. So there was a lot of learning for me, both as a reviewer and an editor in the process. And I really enjoyed the creativity and how people looked very differently at how the tools could be used, and the genres of the different papers as well, from book reviews to curriculum to position papers. It really was a proper kind of stress test of what the technology can do. But also it opened up a huge amount of questions about where things can go next. For us as an editorial board, very much, we had some very interesting discussion around copyright, authorship, openness, and AI that I think, you know, we'll definitely take up again in another forum. So I think the story isn't over, but I think we captured a particular time in the process of understanding generative AI. And as Tom said, it's a valuable resource for both the academic community, but also for teachers and students trying to talk to their students about these issues. And I think the actual exercise we set would be quite a good exercise to do with many different groups, and I'm planning to use it again. So I think that's all for me. I'll pass back to you, Leigh. Thank you.
Thank you, fantastic. And also, I didn't welcome all of our attendees as well. We're in Zoom webinar mode, so it just feels like we're talking to the panelists at the moment, but we have attendees as well. So please, as each author is presenting, or if you have questions, pop those in the chat and we'll be sure to discuss those once we get through hearing from all of the authors. So we're going to start out with Hazel Farrell from Southeast Technological University. And as each of the authors are presenting, I'll pop their articles in the chat as well, so you can have access to those. But I'll turn things over to you, Hazel.
Hi, everybody. Could I have permissions, please, to share my screen? They're turned off at the moment. Thank you.
I think you might be able to now.
Yes,
Yeah.
wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. All right. So what I did is I decided to go with a case study. And it's, as you can see here, it was called Pseudo-Research, a fabricated study on student engagement in music pedagogy, because music is my discipline area. So what was I at here? I suppose I had a lot of experience in working on student engagement approaches, and specifically using technology, you know, and messing around, as Orna and Tom will know, with the e-portfolios, visual engagement, collaborative reflective tools, all of that sort of thing. And I set up this group with a couple of colleagues in our university. The case were called Creative Approaches to Student Engagement. So generative AI sort of fitted very neatly with our mission, really. And that was all about promoting student engagement and enhancing learning experiences. So I was very deeply involved in generative AI over the last year, and in terms of practice-based research, and also in getting out there and presenting, you know, what I was at in for lots of different formats. So the other thing for me was the learning experience. I think Orna was just referring there to, you know, learning how far we could push it. I was very interested in that, to see how far I could actually push the generative AI with a minimal amount of information. So I set out with that goal that I was going to use minimal prompting to see how much value, or how much mileage I could get out of that. And then the other thing is, I decided I would stick with something I was really good at and I knew a hell of a lot about, and that obviously was music pedagogy. And I think I make this point a lot, talking about generative AI, you know, in order to get the most out of it, you need to know what you're talking about in the first place, to make sure then that the outputs are what you want them to be, you know. And also in terms of prompting, you need to know what you're asking for as well. So I think all of us probably are on that page. In terms of my process, I was interested in having that element of authenticity. So in terms of the prompt, my initial one, I pasted it here. So the foundation for the case study is entirely authentic, because it is modeled on one of my classrooms. So it's a university classroom. It's a music degree program, which is absolutely accurate as well. The selected modules around musicology, performance music pedagogy, all of that, that's all factual stuff. Sample size as well, chose small sample, reflective of what we do. And then the areas of focus as well. So there's, it was predisposed towards a positive outcome because of this sort of collaborative thing and visually stimulating resources. So I set it up that way. So that's, I suppose, the foundation and authenticity was important to me in terms of seeing how far we could push it. And then the fabrication was me going to ChatGPT 4. So I used the paid version, and I put in that first prompt there. And then based on that prompt, I took the headings from the AI generated response, and I used them to construct the other 4 prompts. So essentially, I just made up one single prompt, and the rest was done by generative AI. And then in terms of process, I repeated that exercise twice. And my reason for repeating it twice was that my original, the original output that I got was quite American oriented, and I wanted it to be more relevant to an Irish university classroom. So I decided I'm going to repeat the thing and just change one single word, and that was Irish university classroom rather than a university classroom. And that brought me into a world that I didn't expect to be in. And this was the world of this cultural stereotyping. It was really overt. And yes, we had all heard about the biases and everything inherent in generative AI, but this was at a whole different level. So that's the first sentence of the report or the case study that was produced by ChatGPT-4 in Ireland, a land where melodies echo the tales of yore and la de la de la. So you can see straight away there that we're brought into this sort of plastic shamrock type of scenario, and it was mixed with a quest like Lord of the Rings type of idea. So, and when I was comparing that to the original output, the academic nature was nearly dumbed down a bit because I put in the word Irish, and lots of other things emerged from that as well. So for instance, it wasn't just the narrative that permeated the whole case study. It was also things like they invented students. I'll tell you about that in a second, but they changed the names. So they were like American names, and all of a sudden they became Aisling and Sean and Dara and Finn. And yeah, you know, we could argue that, yeah, this was, you know, trying to sort of get that authenticity across. But at the same time, it just, it was a bit twee. And we had this antiquated society versus a modern, you know, technology, and that narrative ran through it. The other thing I suppose that really emerged quite strongly, it was the level of the data, the false data that was produced. And this, again, naively, possibly, it took me back a little bit. So it invented statistics. So I just copied and pasted some of this stuff out of it. So it's saying 40% of students regularly engage. So this is total false data that was being produced. Fictional students. So it actually invented a load of different students and quotes from those students. And I've copied some of these quotes in. So like the fact that these students don't exist, they never said this stuff. And also the statistics are entirely invented. That rang a lot of alarm bells for me in terms of students consuming false information, you know, because it's presented in a way that makes it look really, really authentic. And that sort of took me back a little bit too. Okay, so then just summing everything up, because I'm keeping this quite brief here. I found the exercise to be very useful. I think Leigh and Tom, you were talking there about turning this around quite quickly, but I found that useful as an author because it helped me to maintain the focus. And sometimes when you have these longer deadlines, you get consumed with your other tasks and things like that, and your focus goes away from it. So for me, this was quite useful that it was a tight turnaround. But on saying that, you know, when you read the spec at the start, you think, oh, sure, look, it's ChatGPT is going to be generating this information. I'm not really going to have to do a hell of a lot here, but that was a false assumption on my part, because it was actually a hell of a lot more time consuming than I thought it was going to be, because you really had to go through it and evaluate every single thing and, you know, become familiar with the data and the information that had been generated by AI. Again, this foundational knowledge was essential, because if I didn't know that subject area, if I wasn't an expert in terms of music pedagogy or, you know, the subject area I put forward, I wouldn't have been able to engage as well with it and come up with good enough conclusions around whether the data was good or not, or what was missing and so on. The extent of the inherent bias I found alarming, and maybe that was naive, but I really did. That cultural stereotyping knocked me, and I've used it in classrooms since, actually, with my first years this semester. We messed around a bit with that, and we just did the exact same thing. They were doing something totally different. and we threw in the word Irish, and again, it came up with the whole little, you know, spiel of the leprechauns and the rolling pastures and all that. And then the false information I was talking about a second ago, around the data, quotes, fictional characters, you know, around research integrity, academic integrity. It's presented so convincingly that we actually do need to be very careful about this with our students, I think, and indeed ourselves with what we're taking in. So these were the things, I suppose, that stood out for me there with it. But on saying all of that, it was very beneficial and worthwhile, and I learned a lot from it. And hopefully for other people that read the work that we've all produced, that it'll be beneficial for them too. So that's about it. I just stuck in my email if anyone wants it there. I put in the N-Tutor logo because I just wanted to mention that we have a project there that I'm leading out for SETU at the moment, and we're developing a national generative AI network. And if anyone is interested in getting involved there, do feel free to reach out. All right, thanks, Mill.
Thank you so much, Hazel. And it was, you know, it was wonderful to see so many disciplines represented, and to see music as one of the disciplines that submitted was really fantastic. And thank you for walking us through the process. I'm going to turn things over now to Detroit, Michigan, Michigan State University, Sarah Gretter and Courtney Prater, who will be sharing their article that I'll put in the chat here.
Thank you, Leigh. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite. I'm Courtney Prater, like she just mentioned, Leigh just mentioned. This is Dr. Sarah Gretter. Our book, our article is kind of based on CBL and the challenge-based learning. And what we're doing here in the United States, or Detroit, Michigan specifically, about the Apple Developer Academy, is we're learning how to build apps from scratch, using challenge-based learning as the jumping off tool to kind of start the creativity process into building real life applications for the ecosystem for Apple. So the challenge that we had in the beginning is CBL, which is again challenge-based learning, but in the Detroit public school system, or specifically the American school system, question asking isn't something that we were afforded. We were taught to kind of gear towards working for the big three, which is GM, Ford, or Chrysler, but having the privilege of asking questions and learning how to ask the right questions is where me and a couple of our fellow students kept having our biggest challenges. So we went to our esteemed doctor for this kind of a nudge into the right direction, how can we get out this rut into kind of getting into the process of being more helpful, being more creative, but learning how to ask the right questions. It's always been like, I guess, the biggest stuff for us. Mm-hmm. So Sarah decided to just give us a nudge into the right direction.
Yes, what we ended up doing is an in-depth conversation that we recorded and transcribed. So Courtney, our third author, Karan, and myself had built this relationship over the first year of their experience at the academy. And we sat down and really looked into what it means to be able to ask questions when you have the freedom to be creative and develop app for, you know, one of the most vibrant ecosystem in the world, and what it means on our end as an educator space to create curriculum that affords that, and very much to Hazel's point earlier, that information literacy, or the ability to know that the answers you're asking are actually getting answers that are accurate, is really the space that we're interested in. As you know, students and learners are using Gen AI very much so in app development. For instance, you can have a lot of things generated automatically from those. So we sat down, had that in-depth conversation. We decided to have fun with it because of the scope of this journal, and decided to transcribe the conversation, input it into ChatGPT, and have ChatGPT analyze the transcription to see what it would summarize as some of those roots of the disparities we notice in the learning experiences of some of our students, and the privilege that they may feel in asking questions or not. So we added that extra layers in terms of the research aspect. We then reconvened and looked at what ChatGPT literally spit back up as a list of themes that I would notice out of our conversation that lasted a good hour, right? And we analyzed those themes, realized that for the most part, ChatGPT was really good at summarizing, conglomerating all of the items together, but in terms of the research and the qualitative research experience behind it, really lacked the nuances of the actual experiences we had shared, right? So the cultural, the social, the emotional, all this was completely lost in translation, pretty much. As we inputted our conversation into ChatGPT. So there's different layers for us. I think one was reflecting on how accurate ChatGPT represented, Courtney's family upbringing, my cultural upbringing, and how we saw that privilege that we had or didn't have in asking questions, and really gave us a good understanding of what the tool was capable of doing for research itself, but also the in-depth conversation we had afterwards around those results is what really resulted in what we added to the paper, is really questioning how we just sometimes automatically as professionals or students go to the tool to get answers, but we lack that capacity to ask the right questions or ask the questions that we know are going to get the answers we want, and then summarize this into an educational space that makes sense around creativity and innovation. So very much like Hazel, we came to similar conclusions that there's lots of opportunities, but also lots of red flags to look into.
Great, thank you both. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions as we continue on. So panelists, we'll have questions for each other, and then make sure attendees are popping questions in the chat as well. But in the interest of time, we'll move on to Clive Holtham from Bayes Business School, City University of London. And the floor is yours, Clive.
Thank you, Leigh. I'm Professor of Management in the Business School, and I have got particular interest in learning innovation and also in our equality, diversity, and inclusivity agenda within the school. What motivated me to do the role play simulation that I developed was that our university has approximately 2/3 of our students are from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, but our faculty and professional staff are nowhere near that percentage. So ever since Black Lives Matter in 2020, there's been an undercurrent of concern about microaggressions in relation to both staff and students. And I felt that we needed to develop a role play simulation. And I tried to do this at the beginning of 2023, a year ago. And I failed because I couldn't empathize with the anti-immigration perspective of one of the characters. So I had to abandon that. I just literally couldn't write it. On the 4th of October, I had an epiphany about ChatGPT. Up to then, I'd been a very hostile resistor to generative AI. Partly, I think, because over 20+ years, AI has had all the false promises. Also, I didn't have the bandwidth to absorb it. But anyway, on the 4th of October, there was a workshop in the business school, and I decided that that evening I would start using ChatGPT. So I did. Lo and behold, on the 5th of October, the call came. I got an email with the call on, a different date than you gave. Obviously, this was a later version of the call. So I only had just over 2 weeks to produce this chapter, but I decided that a dialogue would be the way to go. In other words, I could have a go at my role play simulation using ChatGPT as a dialogic partner. So I'd had the idea for a year, but I didn't have a way of actually implementing it. So I started out with 2 characters, an ethnic minority student and an anti-immigration member of staff. And I expanded that to 4 characters by bringing in a Black Lives Matter activist and an older white person who was sort of anxious not to say the wrong thing. I was some of the problems I faced. First one I faced was that the anti-immigration character, ChatGPT, made much too polite. So I had to twice tell ChatGPT, please make this person more hardline, which it then did very, very well. It was very poor on word count, which was a struggle. And I'd asked it some factual questions about organizations which had used role-play sim. And it kept on giving me the same 3 organizations, even though I didn't want those 3. They're all American. So I just gave up on that and had to accept what it gave me. However, the final output I was surprisingly happy with. And I think one of the issues is so many of my colleagues have kind of written off generative AI because it's not a very good search engine. My attitude is the other way around. What is ChatGPT very good at? And it's actually very good at dialogue, especially, I guess, in an area like microaggressions, where there's a lot of material around, and it kind of works across different cultures as well. And so I came up with the idea of a podcast. I was the interviewer in the podcast. ChatGPT was the person I was interviewing. And that was the format that we used to create the simulation, which actually worked very well as far as I was concerned. One thing that I was surprised about was that it introduced stage directions. So if we take the anti-immigration person, Karina, it would say, Karina, open brackets, sarcastically, close brackets. I never asked for these stage directions to be included. It obviously worked out that this was some sort of dialogue script, and it included off its own bat these stage directions, which I would never have thought of doing. So I was actually quite impressed with that, and they were quite. They added some sort of depth to the role-play simulation. I think the main thing that I would do differently is I wouldn't dare a second time to do this on my own. From now onwards, I'm only going to do this in conjunction with our staff and student inclusivity partners. I was kind of like faced with 2 weeks. I had to learn how to use ChatGPT, I had to hone it. I just didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But I wouldn't do it alone again a second time around. But that's not to do with ChatGPT. That's to do with the process of dialogue, as it were. So I was overall quite surprised at its quality, the quality of ChatGPT in dialogue in a sort of fairly well-worn area. I enjoy it. I enjoyed doing it. It was stressful, but I think I would encourage other people in any discipline to look at the potential for dialogue. I'll just finish with one last thing. How am I doing for time, Leigh?
We've got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I don't think I'll. No, I think I've covered all the main points that I wanted to. But I found it a very valuable exercise, and I'm very grateful to the editors for putting up this challenge, even though it led to some sleepless nights.
Well, thanks for answering the call, Clive. And we had talked about as an editorial team about around the ethics and biased algorithms and things like that. So your article is a very fascinating case study, one to look at from that perspective. So thank you. I'm going to turn things now over to Abby McGuire, another Michigan person, Central Michigan University, who will be talking about her paper. Turning it over to you, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you, Leigh. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very glad to be here, and I will echo what Clive said. I'm grateful to the editors for being so brave in putting forth this issue. What I really appreciate was the opportunity to kind of engage in scholarly playfulness and to see what the tool is capable with a very minimal set of human intervention. So my article is called Leveraging ChatGPT for Rethinking Plagiarism, Digital Literacy, and the Ethics of Co-Authorship in Higher Education. And I wrote using ChatGPT 3.5, so the free version, because I wanted to see what is sort of the baseline level of ability that these kinds of Gen AI tools have that are accessible to anyone. So I used ChatGPT 3.5 to write a position paper. And in my reflection, what I did was really compare different types of composing processes. So because the call asked us as authors to write the introduction and critical reflection sections ourselves, that really, especially with the focus on writing, allowed me to think about how does the nature of writing change when using Gen AI tools. And that was kind of the driving question that I started with. So I currently teach in our Master of Science in Administration program at CMU. I teach research methods and organizational behavior. And most of my students are international students. So many of them, English is not their first language. So we've been thinking about and using Gen AI tools as sort of a language mentor, and then also for peer simulated feedback in student writing. But I had never used Gen AI to compose a piece of writing fully. And that was really the driving question that I started with was, you know, what does it mean to co-author with a Gen AI tool, and whose voice and message is elevated when using these tools? And I also wanted to explore ideas about ethics and professionalism regarding use of co-authorship with Gen AI tools. I think that that's been something that many of us have been wrestling with. Whose ideas are these? Where is this information coming from, especially in academia, where we've been trained that we cite sources and we give credit to everything we use. This is sort of a new landscape that we're all kind of learning as we go. So I really appreciated the opportunity to explore this and to see what ChatGPT could compile, looking at the ethics of co-authorship and how that changes with using AI. So the prompt that I used, I gave it a pretty detailed prompt. I told ChatGPT that it was an academic writing an academic position paper for an academic journal on technology enhanced education. I told it the length requirement, which was 2,000 to 3,000 words. I asked it to use APA 7. And then I gave it a little snippet of what I was hoping the position paper would accomplish. And that was to debate or critique the issues related to plagiarism and redefinitions of plagiarism within broader discussions of authorship within higher education. And what it ended up giving me was it gave me a pretty well organized position paper. So I will give it credit. The structure of the language that it used was very good. It gave me nice subheadings. It used transitions. It appeared to create a cohesive piece of writing, but it did take a lot of back and forth. So whereas Hazel said that she kind of gave it minimal prompting, I kind of took that to the next level, and we went back and forth. I say it like it's a human, notice that. But I went back and forth with ChatGPT 3.5, I would say more than 50 times, just trying to get it just right, because it's not good at just writing a 2,000 to 3,000 word piece. It was kind of painstaking. And if you look at the chat itself, you can see that I start the interactions very politely. Can you please do this? Or great job, now add this. And in the end of the interactions, I'm like being very direct. No, that's not right. Add this. But what was really interesting is that it kind of seems to lose its steam at the end. So I could never really get the recommendations fully fleshed out. Its tendency is to really list ideas rather than to create substantive pieces of information. And while it gives some good points, especially I thought there's a section about ethical implications, it does a really good job talking about using transparency and talking about identifying bias and identifying inaccuracy. It did a really good job of kind of listing those things, but there wasn't really any substance into, you know, how do we address these issues and how does this change the nature of co-authorship with these tools? So that's kind of, those were the biggest sort of shortcomings. The other thing, if you read the piece kind of beginning to end, it's one of those things, and anyone who's graded lots of student writing will have recognized this sometimes in student papers too, but sometimes they sound good, but they don't really say anything. So while the structure of the language kind of from an aerial view looked okay, if you read it carefully, you would notice the cadence of the language is really kind of the same, and you notice that the substance of it is really lacking. It completely made up the references. There are, in fact, in-text citations throughout, but none of the references exist. It has a references list, again, all falsified references. So definitely some shortcomings there. In the reflection, in terms of the composing process, so I wrote the introduction, actually narrated that into my phone after a run one morning. And then the position paper was written by ChatGPT, and the reflection I wrote longhand, because we know that there are different kinds of neural connections that we make when we write longhand. And whenever I'm trying to figure something out, that's what I do. And what really struck me about this, one of the key insights that I kind of gathered from doing this is that the interesting thing is that nothing changed about the composing process, but sort of everything changed at the same time when using ChatGPT. The idea still began in my mind. The idea still started here. And it was my job to try to coach them onto the page, which was a lot different than writing by hand, where they just sometimes kind of pour out if you let them. So I think that was the biggest kind of piece. The other big thing that I found, or that I was thinking about in that reflection piece, is to really think about the sense of control. So if we volley our thoughts to a machine, we are in some sense ceding control. And that thought made me think about what some of you have mentioned, is the importance of the opportunities that are inherent in these technologies, but also the need to exercise some higher level of human control. So to really think about, I think in some of our previous conversations that we've had on this topic, I think we called it human hybrid interaction or human hybrid composing processes, but to really think about what that means to compose with these tools.
Thank you so much, Abby. And one of the things from the editorial perspective we learned so much about was this that process of writing. And I think when we first came up with the call, we at least I naively thought, oh, people would just put in one prompt, the article would pop out, and that's what we would look at. And it was clear that wasn't the case, and that there were many iterations and different uses. And we're going to end on one that really took things to another level by feeding AI a book to read and to discuss. So I'm going to turn things over to, moving to Finland now, to Sasa Telkin from University of Helsinki, who is going to talk us through his book review, which used Claude AI.
Thank you, Leigh. Good evening from Helsinki, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and I hope my voice is not going to fail me today. I'm a bit fluey here. So a lot of good things have been said already, and I can only second Abby and Clive in many things. Where to start? Well, who would have thought that a year and a half ago, that we would, at least I would be working with generative AI. I hadn't heard, actually, let's say 18 months ago, that there was generative AI. Of course, AI has been long here, but I was not aware that we could actually use it as we use it nowadays. And I'm working in the field of educational technology. That's just to set it up here. I have actually two main takeaways from the exercise, from the paper. But before I get there, I have some sort of a idea what I wanted to talk about, but I was so inspired by the previous speakers that I think I will take another turn here and talk a bit more about the prompting, because I think that was one of the main things that have been really driving me in this process. Actually, we have seen two different ways so far. I mean, Clive was telling about the way of profiling the generative AI in some way, so that the answers and the way it will produce the dialogue will be consistent. And then there's the iterative process by Abby that you would step by step build on what you have been done. And that's exactly what I did in my case as well. So I started out with a rather simple prompt, and then step by step I built on that. And after, I forget how many iterations it was, but clearly I think it was more than 30 steps, I was finally happy with the end result. But now reflecting backwards, I think if I were to do it now, I would do it totally differently, because now with the knowledge, of course, in hindsight, it's always easier to say, but I would build a profile, a really clear profile. I would give it this character, and then I would interact with it, and then I wouldn't have to worry it's stepping out of character, so to speak. So I could rely on it to be that entity I wanted. And in my case, that would have been a book review critic. Okay, let's go back to my main takeaways, because I think this is something that turns out to be quite important. And this is not really that much related to the work itself, but the process I went through writing it. My background is in humanities. I've studied languages and other philologies, and I think this comes through here. I usually look back after such a process and try to reflect, what is it that I have learned? And one of the major conclusions is that I actually assume too many things. And I noticed that can be a really bad pitfall in this case, because if you start interacting with generative AI and then you assume certain things, then you don't get the results you actually need or want or have had in mind that you will get. So what is important, or actually what I'm trying to say, is that the more precise you can prompt and actually read what the answer is you get, or the reply, the better you can interact with it. So not assuming it understands exactly what you have intended to say will save you time and is much more economical in the sense of time consumption. So that's actually what people do all the time. We assume, but in interpersonal communication, it's less of an issue because we do it anyways, anytime. So yeah, but I think that's for that. Yeah, but maybe the other even bigger issue for me was the part of what I would call respectfulness. So my aim usually, even every day when I work with generative AI, and I work every day with it, with Claude, with ChatGPT mainly, is I treat it as an assistant, but like a human assistant. So I try to be polite. I try to ask please. I try to really remember that every time. There is no real, as far as I'm concerned, no real data so far to prove that this is beneficial. But I believe in the long run that is the only way to go, because generative AI is here to stay. It's not going to go anyway. So why have two sets of rules, behavioral rules, one with your coworkers and one with generative AI? Because it's not always going to be just in written form. Sooner or later you can interact it with your voice over, I don't know, actually you can already do it with your with ChatGPT on your as an application. You can already talk to it and it will talk to you back. So I think it makes very much sense to have this one standard of being polite. Actually, there's one point I want to mention is, although there is no evidence pointing to it performing better if you're polite to it, there is actually already some evidence that it is susceptible to bribing, which is quite interesting. And this is something I would like to further investigate. How does it actually work? As a concept, it seems very intriguing. How could that even be possible, bribing an AI, because you cannot really pay it anything? Yeah, I think that's about it in a nutshell, what I wanted to tell you about my work in general and what I have learned from this really interesting journey, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I've been keeping an eye on the chat. Our attendees are quiet so far, but if you have anything that you'd like to pop question-wise in the audience, now is the time where we're going to move to Q&A. And if any of the panelists have questions for each other, or Tom, if you want to pop in with some other large-scale ideas, that'd be great.
Sure, thanks. No, I just want to echo the sheer range of things. I thought Clive's was just insanely inventive, engaged in that dialogue there like that. I must admit, like, some of the stuff I wasn't as familiar with Cloud or Perplexity, I've heard of them, so it's interesting to see that. But can I just ask any of the panelists, what was the thing that surprised you most in engaging with Gen AI?
I don't know if you want people to just jump in. I'll jump in, Tom, if you want to. What surprised me most, I had played with it a hell of a lot before, but it was the first time I pushed it so hard. And in pushing it so hard, and the data that it was actually putting out there, it really surprised me in terms of how authentic it actually sounded and was presented as. And then that said to me, oh my God, students are going to just suck this up and think that this is actually all real, whereas the entire thing was fake, you know. And I thought, yeah, you know, this is dangerous, you know.
Abby, you sort of said something similar in the sense that what it constructed was pretty darn good.
Structurally, yes. Like if you looked at it kind of from an aerial view and didn't delve into it too deeply, at first glance, it sounded, you know, it was well structured, and it was using transitions and those kinds of things. But I think what really surprised me was just the process of trying to engage the Gen AI tool to construct the entire text. I had never done that before, and I think the most surprising thing was that there was still an element in that craft of writing. It was kind of like creating a sculpture, right? Like you're doing it, you're building it in layers, you're chiseling away bits here and you're adding bits there. And that craft element was still apparent when using the machine, but it kind of felt like trying to make a sculpture with your hands tied behind your back, because you're trying to coach something else to do it for you. And I think that was the really surprising piece. A little voice in my head towards the end of trying to perfect it to get what I wanted, the little voice in my head kept saying, this is terrible. I never want to write like this again. Because we think about composing with these tools as being something that's very easy, or we've all been witnesses to the conversations about cheating and violations of academic integrity and how students are taking the easy way out. But to really use a tool like this to make a piece of writing that says what you want it to say, that you want to put out into the world, actually takes a lot of iteration. So that was what surprised me.
What was surprising on my end was the frustration I found in putting the work out there, but also knowing that I could do it faster, just because I've acquired years and years of doctoral studies, learning how to do those research methods and so forth. And so that clash between how quickly the tool could spit something out, but also how much time it took me to review the content, and knowing that I could have done a better job initially. So that frustration I didn't anticipate having with the tool, but it was definitely there.
I can have a say here as well, because I think to have his point exactly, well, first, my impression, well, I'm very impressed by the speed. Still, I don't understand how it's possible that it produces the text. And so intricate and really detailed structurally and sometimes even content-wise. But to Avi's point, I think there is comfort in understanding, or for us knowing that it's not really easy. So not everybody can do it. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of understanding how it works. So the prompting aspect, I think that's some sort of silver lining, if you want, for us, that if you want to compare to the students. So the students will have a hard task commanding generative AI in order for it to produce what is needed at school or at the academic level. So I think there is still we still have an advantage as professionals, if you want, that we understand it's not really just toying around with it. It's really a tool that needs to be mastered.
Now, you really pushed it? Was it harder to do, or because I mean,
the important thing was I already had for a year this mental model of what I wanted to do. So and I'd failed in it. That was, an incredible driver for me. Something I literally had been unable, for emotional reasons, I guess, to do. This freed me up. This anti-immigration personality it performed very well. I mean, the sad news, of course, is presumably it's got a lot of material off the internet to work off to generate this. That's I guess, the bad news side. One thing that I would mention is that I deliberately started the podcast with a very small microaggression. I made assumptions about the chatbot and where they came from, Switzerland. Now, if, say, Aristotle had been involved in this discussion, or any facilitator, they would pick up that I had myself preached what I was preaching about. There wasn't any way, I think, that ChatGPT at the moment is going to pick up that kind of subtlety. But it also suggests to me that when we ask students to use it, we almost deliberately need to build in certain things which only a human probably could recognize. I think that's quite a major learning for me, because it is relatively superficial what it generates. It doesn't seem to have a second order of thought, which an expert human would have.
Thankfully for a while. But your point was so true, Leigh, and I'm with you on this one. I think there was certainly an expectation that you just sort of give it an essay title, type it in, and it spits out this 2,500 word complete essay. I don't think we're at that level yet.
And I think as I'm watching the time too, I know we're close to wrap up, that as we learned so much as editors through this process, through the authors that are here and everyone appearing in the journal. And I know we've heard a couple stories of the issue being used as a learning tool, and that's really what our hope was, that you can take this to staff meetings or in classes with students and kind of tease through all of these issues that we're all wrestling with and struggling with. And I think because it is still somewhat early days, there's a lot of unknowns, and the digital literacies around AI are not there yet. But we've heard how much the literacy has increased just through this session this afternoon, and through the issue itself of how much learning is behind interacting with this technology in particular. And just want to again thank the authors for taking the risk of putting themselves out there for this issue as well, and to ILTA for supporting the journal and supporting a space where we can explore and play like this. So if there's any last minute thoughts, or Marie, if you have a wrap up for us, we'll head on our way.
Well, thank you very much, Leigh, and thank you everybody, and for all the presenters for the excellent insights and the learning journey that you presented and all the different dimensions. I think I agree with you. It'll be really helpful in terms of understanding this. When I read the articles myself, I was like wowed by it in terms of it helped me to understand what was involved in all of this as a beginner looking at it. The importance in terms of teaching our students, and that, you know, we're on a journey of educating our students in using all of these different technologies, and we shouldn't be afraid to do that, but that it's done within a kind of a sense of support and realism, and I suppose what originality means in the different disciplines in which they're teaching, they're learning themselves, in which we're teaching. So that's really, really important. So thank you so much, and thank you to our colleagues from in far-flung places who gave of their time this morning and later on this evening today for being with us, and to thank our attendees as well. And thank you, Leigh, very much for all your efforts in bringing this together, this webinar together for us in UCD. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, David. See ya.
Thanks, Leigh. Take it easy. That was
All
great.
right. Bye.
See ya.